Ever wondered what it would be like to discover something new every single day? Welcome to my channel, where curiosity leads the way. From interesting ideas to engaging content, there's always something here for you. Make sure to subscribe and be part of this journey of discovery.
Need to check the used names list and then write the story. The band names are James Calloway, Owen, Diane, Garrett, Nathan, Ray, Carol, Vivienne, Marcus, Lily, Tyler, Claire, Sophie, Derek, Patrice, Mark, Sandra, Pete, Corinne, Conrad, Walter, Brenda, Fern, Audrey, Biscuit, Dr. Manathary, Biscuit, Dr. Rad, Okafor, Ethan, Renee, Haley, Joanna, Jen Halstead, Russell, Nora, Kyle, Heather, Patrick, Molly. New names I'll use: Adrian, narrator; Vanessa, wife; Dominic, business partner, affair; Caleb, son, 14; Irene, narrator's mother; Leo, narrator's best friend; Judge Whitmore. Brief mention: my son's name is Caleb. He's 14, quiet, serious for his age, the kind of kid who notices everything but says nothing until he absolutely has to. I used to think that was a personality trait. Turns out it was just patience. He was waiting for the right moment. I just didn't know the right moment would be the one that ended my marriage. Let me back up. I'm a cardiovascular surgeon. 12 years of my life went into building that career. Med school, residency, fellowship, the whole brutal gauntlet. By the time I was 38, I had a practice, a reputation, and a partner. Not a wife. A business partner. Dominic. Dominic and I met during my second year of fellowship. He wasn't a doctor. He was the guy who made doctors' businesses actually work. Healthcare administration, billing systems, patient management software. That was his world. He was sharp, funny, the kind of guy who remembered your coffee order after meeting you once. We clicked immediately. When I decided to open my own practice at 34, he was the first person I called. I put up the medical expertise. He ran everything else. Within 4 years, we had 2 locations, 18 staff, and a reputation that had other surgeons calling us asking how we did it. I also had a wife, Vanessa. I met Vanessa at a charity fundraiser 9 years ago. She was wearing a green dress and arguing with a catering manager about the placement of centerpieces. I found that inexplicably attractive. We dated for 2 years and got married on a Saturday in October when the leaves were just starting to turn. Caleb came along 2 years later, then our daughter Maya 3 years after that. For a long time, I thought I had the life people write articles about. The cracks, when I look back now, were there earlier than I admitted to myself. Vanessa and I were always ships passing. My hours were brutal. Surgery doesn't negotiate with dinner schedules. She resented the absences, and I understood why. But understanding didn't fix anything. We tried counseling twice. Both times we stopped going after 6 sessions because we were both too busy to continue, which tells you everything about why we needed counseling in the first place. But I genuinely never thought she would go to Dominic. The person who sat across from me at quarterly meetings, the person who was in my house for Caleb's birthday 3 weeks before I found out, who shook my hand and said, "Great party, man," while I grilled burgers in my own backyard. Caleb found out first. He came home early from school on a Tuesday in March, some kind of half-day for teacher development that I'd apparently been told about and forgotten. Vanessa's car was in the driveway. Dominic's was parked half a block down the street, which I later understood was deliberate. Caleb walked in through the garage entrance the way he always did, and he heard them before he saw them. He didn't come to me that night. He didn't come to me the next day either. My son sat with that information for 4 days by himself, at 14 years old. I don't know how he did it. When I finally asked him much later, he said he wanted to be sure. He said he didn't want to blow up our family on something he might have misunderstood. He hadn't misunderstood anything. On the 5th day, he used his phone to do something I wouldn't have thought to do. He downloaded an app that timestamps and GPS stamps photos. Then he waited. He'd noticed the pattern: Dominic's car on Tuesday afternoons, always the same block. So the following Tuesday, Caleb left school at normal time, walked home slowly, and when he saw the car parked in its usual spot, he didn't go inside. He went around the back of the house, climbed onto the deck, and took photos through the sliding glass door. I'm not going to describe what he saw. He's my kid, and that image will already be with him long enough without me putting more words to it. What I will tell you is that he got clear photos, time-stamped, GPS confirmed, of my wife and my business partner in my house on a Tuesday afternoon. He sent them to me in a text message while I was between surgeries. The text said, "Dad, I need you to look at these. I'm sorry, I love you. I was standing in a scrub room with a nurse I've worked with for 6 years, and I had to excuse myself. I went into the men's room and I sat on a bench, and I looked at my phone for what felt like a very long time. I'm a surgeon. I've delivered terrible news to families in waiting rooms. I've held it together in situations most people can't imagine. I sat in that bathroom and I could not breathe. I called my attorney before I called anyone else. Her name is Beverly, and I'd used her for business contracts for years. I told her I needed to talk, not about business, and she heard something in my voice because she said, "I'll move my 4 o'clock. Come in at 4:30. I did not go home that night. I told Vanessa I had an emergency surgery, which was not entirely a lie. I did have a follow-up procedure that ran late. I stayed at the hospital longer than I needed to. I sat in the parking structure and called my best friend Leo and told him what happened, and he said nothing for almost 30 seconds. And then he said, "Tell me what you need." I didn't know yet, but it mattered that he asked. Beverly, my attorney, was methodical in a way that I needed desperately in that moment, because I was not methodical at all. She walked me through what I had. She told me what it could mean for the divorce, for custody, for the business. That last word hit me like a second punch. The business. Dominic didn't just have access to my wife. He had access to everything. Our financials, our patient systems, our contracts. I had structured the partnership with him handling operational control because I trusted him completely. I had signed documents that gave him significant authority over business decisions during my surgical hours. Beverly said quietly, "Have you considered that this may not be only personal?" I hadn't. I hadn't let myself go there yet. She told me to do nothing visible for 2 weeks. No confrontation, no changes in behavior, nothing that would tip them off. During that time, she brought in a forensic accountant and a separate business attorney who specialized in partnership disputes. I went to work every day and sat across from Dominic in meetings and asked about billing cycles and patient intake numbers. And I want to tell you, I handled it with dignity. But the truth is, I barely remember those 2 weeks. I was running on procedure, muscle memory. I operated on 3 patients in that period, and I was technically fine. The part of my brain that does surgery doesn't share space with the part that was falling apart. What the forensic accountant found was worse than I'd expected and not as catastrophic as I'd feared. Dominic had been redirecting a small but consistent percentage of vendor contracts to a company that turned out to be an LLC he controlled. It wasn't dramatic embezzlement. It was patient, methodical skimming over about 18 months. Not enough to destroy us, but more than enough to destroy him. Beverly said we had him on the business fraud independent of anything personal. That was important, she said, because it meant I could remove him from the partnership without it looking like a scorned husband acting emotionally. I said I was a scorned husband acting emotionally. She said, "You can be both. We just only show one in court." The morning I confronted Dominic, I did it in our conference room with Beverly present and the business attorney present and a document package that Beverly's team had prepared. I did not raise my voice. I want to be honest. I had practiced not raising my voice for 3 days. I'd stood in my bathroom at 6 in the morning and rehearsed staying calm because I knew that if I lost control of myself, I lost leverage, and I could not afford to lose anything else. Dominic walked in thinking it was a routine meeting. He looked at Beverly and his face changed. He started talking before I could, something about how he could explain the vendor contracts. There was context. It wasn't what it looked like. I waited until he stopped. Then I slid the other documents across the table. The ones that weren't about money. He went completely still. "I'm not asking for an explanation," I said. "I'm telling you what happens next." What happened next was this. He signed the dissolution of our partnership that morning, relinquishing his equity stake in exchange for us not filing criminal fraud charges. He had 48 hours to remove himself from both office locations. His access codes were revoked before he left the building. It took less than 2 hours. 18 months of skimming, 9 years of friendship, and whatever he and my wife had built together, all of it, 2 hours. I won't pretend that felt like winning. I walked out to the parking lot afterward and stood next to my car and felt absolutely nothing. Hollow. Like someone had reached in and scooped out everything that wasn't the surgeon. Vanessa, I handled differently. I had not spoken to her about any of it. Not the photos, not Dominic, not the attorneys. For 2 weeks, she had lived in our house and eaten dinner with our children and slept in our bed, and I had come home late enough each night that I didn't have to talk much, and she had not noticed that anything was wrong. I keep coming back to that. She didn't notice. The evening after I dealt with Dominic, I came home at a normal hour for the first time in 2 weeks. Caleb looked at me from the living room couch when I walked in. This careful, watchful look, and I gave him the smallest nod and he went upstairs. I don't know how much a 14-year-old should be involved in the mechanics of his parents' marriage collapsing, but he had started this in his own way, and I thought he deserved to know it was moving. Vanessa was in the kitchen. I sat down at the island, and she asked if I wanted dinner, and I said yes, and we went through about 4 minutes of the most surreal normalcy of my life. Her plating food, me sitting there, the refrigerator hum, the distant sound of Maya's cartoons from upstairs. Then I said, "I know about Dominic." She put the plate down. Didn't turn around for a moment. "I know about the Tuesday afternoons. I know about the car parked down the block. I know because our son took photos and sent them to me because he didn't know what else to do, and he's 14 years old, and he had to carry that for almost a week before he told me." She turned around then, and I have to be honest about something. She didn't look guilty. She looked exhausted, like she'd been waiting for this conversation and was relieved in some terrible way that it had finally arrived. That is perhaps the thing that hurt most, that she was relieved. She said she was sorry. She said it hadn't meant to happen this way. She said, and I remember this clearly, "You were never really here, Adrian." I said, "Neither were you." I slept in the guest room that night. I filed for divorce the next morning. What followed was, to put it plainly, ugly in the way all divorces are ugly when two people who once loved each other can no longer agree on anything. Vanessa hired a good attorney. My attorney was better, partly because I'd already spent 2 weeks building a case and she was starting from nothing. The DNA question came up. I brought it up. Beverly advised me to, and she was right. Maya was 3. The timing of the affair. We didn't know exactly when it had started. I asked for a DNA test as part of the proceedings, and Vanessa's attorney objected, and Beverly said pleasantly that we could do this the easy way or the complicated way. Maya is mine. The test confirmed it. I can't fully explain the relief of that moment, and I also can't fully explain the specific grief of the moment, that I'd had to ask it all, that we'd arrived at a place where I didn't know for certain what was mine. Caleb, when I told him the results, said, "I knew she was yours, Dad. She has your ears." I don't know why that broke me open the way it did. Something about the fact that he'd been paying attention all along to the things that mattered. The business fraud gave us significant leverage in the financial settlement. Dominic had damaged the practice, not devastatingly but measurably, and that damage was quantifiable, and more importantly, it was connected to him in a way that complicated Vanessa's position. Her attorney was smart enough to see that pressing too hard on the financial side risked surfacing details that implicated her in ways she didn't want. So she settled. I kept the practice. I kept the house, which I later sold because I didn't want to live in it anymore. I got primary custody of both kids, with Vanessa having alternating weekends. This was not a punishment, or I didn't intend it as one. Caleb asked to live with me, and Maya is young enough that stability meant consistency, and I was the more stable presence at that moment. Vanessa's attorney fought it, but not as hard as I expected. I think Vanessa was, in the end, something I'd spent 9 years not seeing clearly. A person who wasn't sure she wanted the life she'd built, and who had found a side door and taken it. She moved in with Dominic 4 months after the divorce was finalized. I want to tell you I was surprised. I wasn't. I also want to tell you it didn't affect me, and that's less true. There's something specific about watching the two people who betrayed you build a life together. It's not exactly jealousy. It's more like you keep turning it over, trying to understand the logic of it. How that happens. What that feels like from the inside. Leo told me to stop trying to understand it. Some things don't have logic, he said. They just have consequences. He was right, but I kept turning it over anyway for longer than I'd like to admit. The first year was the hardest, not because of Vanessa. I was surprised to find the marriage grief was manageable, because I think the marriage had been dying for a long time before the affair, and some part of me had known it. The hard part was Caleb. My son had blown up his own family. He knew what he was doing when he took those photos. He did it deliberately, carefully, with a 14-year-old's version of strategy, and then he had to live with the aftermath. His mother moving out, his parents at opposite corners of every school event, his little sister asking questions he didn't have good answers to. About 3 months after the divorce, he came to me late on a Sunday night and sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Do you wish I hadn't told you?" I put down what I was reading. I looked at my son, this quiet, serious kid who had somehow managed to do the thing that most adults never do, which is act on what he knew was right even when it would cost him. I said, "No, not for a single second. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He went back upstairs. I don't think either of us needed more than that. Dominic's reputation in the local medical business community didn't survive the dissolution, even without criminal charges. Word travels. People talk. The specific nature of what he'd done, defrauding a partner who trusted him, is the kind of thing that closes doors permanently in a professional world built on referrals and relationships. I heard through mutual contacts that he and Vanessa had moved to another city about 18 months after everything ended. I don't know much about their life there. I don't ask. I'm 41 now. I have 2 kids, a rebuild practice, and a business partner who is a 62-year-old former hospital administrator named George, who has absolutely no interest in anything except operational efficiency and fly fishing. He is the least interesting business partner imaginable, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. I started dating again last year. Slowly, carefully, in the way that you do things when you've learned what happens when you stop paying attention to your own life. There's a woman I've been seeing for about 6 months. She's a high school history teacher. She has no patience for drama, and she has never once made me feel like a consolation prize. That last part, I've learned, is not a small thing. Caleb is 16 now. He plays guitar badly and argues about everything, and last month got a 94 on a history paper about the Korean War. He is, without question, the person I'm proudest of in this world. Maya is 6. She still asks sometimes why mommy lives somewhere else. I tell her that mommy loves her very much, and that sometimes grown-ups make choices that change where everyone lives. It's not a complete answer, and she's smart enough to know it. When she's older, I'll give her more of the truth. For now, I'm trying to protect whatever I can of her ability to trust the world before it gets complicated. The other night, Caleb was in the kitchen while I was cooking, and he said, out of nowhere, "Did you know Dominic's company got sued?" I said I hadn't heard that. He said, "Looked it up. Some vendor thing. Sounds like he pulled the same move somewhere else." I turned down the stove burner. I thought about what to say. "Some people don't change," I said. "That's not your problem anymore." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know. I just wanted you to know I was right." I laughed. Actually laughed, the first time in a while that something about any of this felt like it could be funny. "Yeah," I said, "you were right." He smiled and went back to his phone. There's no clean ending to a story like this. No moment where I stood in front of everyone and delivered some perfectly devastating speech. No public humiliation for either of them. No courtroom breakdown. No moment where justice arrived in a satisfying and complete way. What I have instead is this: 2 kids, a practice that's doing better than it was, a life that's mine again, in a way it stopped being for a long time. I sleep in a house where every piece of furniture is something I chose. I work with people I trust. On Tuesday afternoons, I sometimes leave the office early, pick Maya up from school, and take her for ice cream. We sit in the car and she talks about her day and I listen to every word. It turns out that's what I was missing. Not the marriage, not even the version of myself that existed before all of this. Just the permission to pay attention to what actually mattered. My son taught me that. By paying attention himself when I couldn't. I owe him more than I know how to say. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in this story. Not the affair, not the fraud, those are just events. What actually happened is that a 14-year-old boy decided that truth mattered more than comfort, and that decision changed everything. Caleb didn't have to do what he did. He could have looked away. He could have told himself he'd misunderstood, or that it wasn't his place, or that the fallout wasn't worth it. Most adults in his position would have done exactly that. But he didn't. He waited, he made sure, and then he acted. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of something quieter and more durable than either of those things. He just couldn't live with knowing something true and pretending he didn't. I think about that a lot. The cost of pretending. For years I had been half present in my own life. Technically there, physically in the house, but not paying attention to the things that were actually happening. Vanessa and I had been drifting in opposite directions for a long time, and neither of us had the courage to name it. I buried myself into practice, in surgeries, in the clean, solvable problems of medicine, because those were easier than the unsolvable problems sitting across from me at dinner. That's not Vanessa's fault, and it's not mine in some simple way. It's just what happened when 2 people stop being honest with each other and start being polite instead. What Dominic did had its own logic too, when someone puts total trust in you. professional trust, personal trust, the kind of trust where you hand over the keys to everything and you exploit it. You're not just betraying one person. You're making a statement about who you are when no one's watching. He had 18 months of no one watching. What he did with that time told me everything about him that 9 years of friendship hadn't. The thing about consequences is that they're rarely immediate. They accumulate quietly, and then one Tuesday afternoon, a teenager comes home early, and the whole structure collapses at once. It looks sudden from the outside. It wasn't. Every choice Vanessa made, every invoice Dominic redirected, every night I stayed at the hospital longer than necessary, rather than go home and have a real conversation. All of it was already in motion. The collapse was just the moment it became visible. I'm not interested in framing any of this as karma in some cosmic sense. I don't think the universe keeps score. What I do believe is that the choices we make quietly, when we think nobody's watching, are exactly the choices that define us. Dominic thought no one would notice the vendor contracts. Vanessa thought Tuesday afternoons were safe. I thought not being present was the same as not causing harm. We were all wrong, in our own ways, and the reckoning was just the math working itself out. What I'm left with, after all of it, is a belief in a very simple thing. Paying attention is a form of integrity. Paying attention to your kids, to what's actually happening in your own house, to whether the person sitting across from you at dinner is still the person you think they are, and whether you're still the person they need you to be. I failed at that for a long time. Caleb didn't. At 14, with no guidance and no roadmap, he paid attention and then he did something about it. He taught me that intelligence without honesty is just cleverness. That strength without the willingness to act on what you know is just endurance. And the most ethical thing a person can do, often the hardest thing, is simply to not look away. I'm still learning that. I think I'll be learning it for a long time. But I've got a good teacher.